Hi everybody, good morning and thank you for connecting. I hope that you are able to see the class perfectly and I hope that you will enjoy the class. The plan is to analyze a text and just to try to help with some vocabulary, some expressions, and to try and help teaching English for free for 1 hour approximately. And hopefully this class will help people at different levels. Of course, people have very different levels, from maybe level A1 beginners, and some people have level C1 or maybe even proficiency C2. So hopefully this class will help everybody. That's the intention. And you can see the story on the left is just a short story and it's with a moral. So the story is a nice story with an interesting moral and it's something different, and that's the intention today, to show you a story that is different from a news article, from a book. So it's just a different idea, and that's the plan for today. So hopefully you will understand the vocabulary and hopefully you will learn a few things from the lesson. The connection, fingers crossed, the connection will be okay. Yesterday seemed to be okay, and hopefully with FaceTime. So on the right I have FaceTime, on the left obviously is the internet, on the bottom right here you can see my notes. So fingers crossed the connection will be okay and you can enjoy the class and benefit from some of the tips and some of the expressions. Okay. Classes, I have other separate classes. For example, every morning at 9 o'clock we have small groups. For example, Monday, Wednesday and Friday we have level B1 to B2 at 9 o'clock. It's open for a group of 10, but there's a lot of space at the moment and it's a small fee of €4 if you want to join. It's some speaking, some vocabulary, and also on Tuesday and Thursday we have a class for the C1 to C2, which is a little more advanced, but the concept is the same: more vocabulary, more expressions, and some conversation as well. So they are available in the morning. Also in the afternoon, every day at 3:15, we have different webinars that are open for everybody. For example, we have grammar webinar on Monday. Tuesday it's sport at 3:15. Wednesday it's IELTS. Today, Thursday, it's the advanced. Friday is business English at 3:15, and also we have a B2 webinar. So there's lots of possibilities, lots of options if you are interested to join in other groups. But today is just a free direct class for me to give you some tips and to give you some advice as well. So again, hopefully everything is okay. I'm just going to double check the Facebook here and to make sure that we are still live and to make sure that we are still connected, because sometimes we have difficulty. So it looks like we're working. So the name of this story is 3 Feet from Gold. That's the title of the story. And of course we need to begin because it's irregular. We say 1 foot is singular, and it's irregular in the plural because we say 2 feet. That's very, very important. So singular 1 foot and plural 2 feet, 3 feet, not foots. That's the mistake. There's another important lesson, another important tip in relation to feet. When you travel, we say we travel by bus, by plane, by bike, but when you walk, we say on foot. That's the typical irregular, typical correction, typical mistake. So it's necessary when you walk, we say I will travel on foot. I will meet you, but I will have to walk, but I will travel on foot, or I will travel by bike. So that's the only irregular point that's very necessary also. And third, we have measurement. For example, meter in Spain, in other countries, you measure, como medir, you measure meters, but in English we measure feet. So for example, my height, mi altura, my height is 5'10", 5'9" So that's the third point in relation to foot. Okay, so in English we say 5 foot 10 inches, and that's approximately my height: 5'10", 5'9", etc. So they're the typical lessons in relation to foot and feet. We have another expression. We say to put your foot in it, and that means when you say something stupid or you do something stupid, particularly when you say something silly or you say something stupid and you make the situation worse, you put your foot in it. Okay, so that's a typical expression. You can also say to put your foot in your mouth, and that's the same idea when you say something stupid and you do, or as I said, probably say something stupid, you put your foot in your mouth. Okay, it is another possibility. We say to foot the bill, and that's very, very interesting. So to foot the bill, the significance is to pay the bill or to take responsibility for the bill. That is very common in English. So if you foot the bill, the significance is you pay the bill. Okay, another expression is to get your foot in the door, typical in the context of a company when you start in a business or you start in a company for the first opportunity. It's a little chance, it's a little opportunity. It's just your foot in the door. It's just a small opportunity, and hopefully you can have other opportunities after this small opportunity. That's a very famous expression, to get your foot in the door. So there's 3 or 4 contexts in relation to foot and feet, and here it's the distance. So 3 feet from gold, the significance is the distance, 3 feet, maybe 1 meter or maybe less from gold. Okay, gold, of course, in Spanish is oro, and we have lots of possibilities. For example, golden is the adjective. You can say a golden handshake, which is very interesting because to shake hands is como dar el mano. So to shake hands is dar el mano. The verb to shake, we say milk shake, this action to shake. So when you have the milk and you shake the milk, the significance is a drink, a special type of drink, a milk shake. And to shake hands is to give the handshake. And a golden handshake, I think, is typical when you finish your job, maybe to retire, como jubilar in Espanol. When you retire, the company give you a lot of money to make you leave the company, like compensation. So a golden handshake, my interpretation is when they leave the company and you have to receive some money before you leave. Okay, it's possible to say everything is golden, informal, and that means everything is maybe perfect, everything is wonderful, everything is magnificent. So everything is golden, and that's typical expression as well. It's possible gold dust. Dust is like polvo, and you can say, for example, the tickets for the football match, the tickets for the concert, the tickets are like gold dust, and that means they're very, very in demand. A lot of people want the tickets, so the tickets are like gold dust, and the significance is it's very difficult to find the tickets because they are very, very valuable. Okay, so very important expressions, very, very typical and very conversational and very typical in conversation. They're the most typical expressions with gold. So now we will begin the story. So here you can see a little video for the story, which is practically the same as the text below. But in this class, the concept is just to explain the vocabulary and try to identify the expressions first. Okay, so here is the story. During the gold rush, and that's a very, very famous expression because obviously the verb to rush is a verb, but you can have a substantivo como a rush, which is like un prisa. So tengo un prisa, it means I have a rush or I am in a rush, and that means in a hurry. So you have very little time, you need to move very, very quickly. So the verb to rush is very important. For example, to rush your friend, the significance is to put pressure on your friend. To rush your food, to rush your dinner, the significance is to eat your dinner very, very quickly. You can have rush hour traffic, very, very famous, and the significance is the hour that is most active, the busy, ocupado, más ocupado, the busiest hour in relation to the traffic. This is rush hour traffic, typically 9 o'clock in the morning or maybe 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon. This is rush hour traffic. Okay, and here a gold rush, the significance is the gold appeared very, very fast, very, very quickly in the United States, in the west coast of the United States, San Francisco, Los Angeles. They discovered gold maybe in the 19th century, and everybody, a lot of people traveled to the west coast of America to try to find money, to try to find jobs, and that was called the gold rush. In relation to rush as well, you can have a rush of blood to the head. That's a famous expression as well. So when the blood travels very quickly to your head, the significance is a rush of blood to the head, and typically your decisions are maybe not good and your actions are maybe not very balanced or very logical when you have a rush of blood to the head. It's like your instinct and you make maybe different decisions. So a rush of blood to the head is a very famous expression as well. So here, during the gold rush, during is durante. A man is the subject who, this is called a relative pronoun. So the relative pronoun in English, we have who, which, that. They are the most typical relative pronouns. So basically here, who is replacing, it's the substitution for a man. So it's just really emphasis. It's not necessary. You can eliminate who and you have the same idea. A man had been mining, but here we have the relative pronoun. So it's like an extra subject. This is very, very advanced verbal tense because the verb is to mine. The substantivo is a mine, and it's typical when you are searching for gold, when you are searching for oil, when you are searching for minerals in the ground. You need the verb to mine. I think in Spanish it's come up minar, and it's very similar. So to mine for gold, to mine for oil, that means to search for something. Okay, so the substantivo is a mine, and here we had the auxiliary verb have in the past plus the participle, the verb to be. So this really, I suppose, is the verb to be in the past perfect and the gerundio. So it's the past perfect continuous. So had been mining probably before another action in the past. So it's a very advanced verbal tense that's very complicated but very fluent and very impressive as well if you can use it correctly. For the location, we say in Ireland, in England, in Dublin, in America. In is typical for a country or typical for a city as well. For several, which is very similar in Spanish, it's like various. Okay, so several people, several days, which is probably the same as various people, various days. Months, so just the pronunciation, the TH, it's normally like a zeta in Espanol. Very difficult pronunciation in English because in Ireland in particular, it is common for people to maybe pronounce this a little bit differently. So for me, for example, here, the TH is possible de, but phonetically it's the. Small example, but another one is that. Phonetically it should be that, but probably in Ireland and for me and for some people we'd say that, like a D for Dublin. So that's just a curious pronunciation, maybe personality or characteristic of Ireland and for me. So here it's months. I suppose months would be difficult pronunciation possibly, so just be careful always with the TH sound. Quit his job, so the verb to quit is to leave your job. To quit your job, you can say the phrasal verb to step down. You can also say the verb to resign. So these are very, very interesting verbs because the verb is to sign, which is firmar, but to resign, the pronunciation is difficult because the G is silent, resign. The significance is you leave your job, and maybe it's more formal. Typical in football managers can resign, so they leave their position. To step down is probably in a position of authority. So maybe the manager or the president or the prime minister or Taoiseach in Ireland steps down, and that means they step, passo, no, say passo is a step, but the verb to step down is to reduce your position and maybe to lose or reduce your authority as well. So to step down is famous, and to quit is almost the same. And there is another phrasal verb to give up, which all mean rendirse in Español. Creo que es como rendirse. So to quit your job is the same as to leave, dejar, leave your job, step down from your job, resign from your job. They are very, very typical. Remember, the word as is very, very flexible, and here the significance is because. We can also say as for mientras, We can also say as, which is like, and they're the most typical situations. So for example, I go to the shop as I need some milk. I go to the shop because I need some milk. The second possibility, I go to the shop as you go to the cinema. So at the same time, I go to the shop as you go to the cinema. So that's mientras in Espanol, like while in English. Here we have a very, very interesting structure. So the subject is he, subject pronoun, I, you, he, she. So this is the subject. The verb is to strike, which is very, very advanced. Think of baseball. You strike the ball, which is to hit. That's the first possibility. The past is irregular, struck, okay? And it's like to hit, but the expression in English is to strike gold, and the significance is encontrar, to find gold. So if you strike gold, this is the significance that you find gold when you mine. Okay, you can also say to strike it lucky, and again, that's almost the same. The significance is to have success or to find something, and this is the context here as well. The second possibility for a strike is typical for the workers. Imagine the bus drivers, the train drivers, the doctors, the teachers, the nurses. It's very typical for these workers maybe to consider or to have a strike. In Espanol, una huelga. Okay, so a strike is una huelga. Very important vocabulary, very good vocabulary. And in English, it's the same as well. We have a few very, very common expressions. When you meet a person, something from this person impacts you. It's an impression, the first impression. So for example, my big nose, imagine I have a very big nose, and that's very obvious, and it's your first impression. When you see me, you see my big nose. So my big nose strikes you. Okay, so it's like impacts you. So you can say the painting was very striking, but you can say what struck me about him was his big nose. Okay, so that's a possibility. Nose, because you need to be careful the difference between nose and noise. And you can have a nosy person, which is a person who maybe wants to know all your business, wants to know all your details, wants to know all the gossip, wants to know all the stories. That is a nosy person. Okay, so it is flexible. But noise is ruido in Espanol. There's a lot of noise on the street. There's a lot of noise in the building. So noise is ruido. And again, the structure is what struck me about him. So what impacted me, what hit me, what I realized, what I identified. What was obvious about him was his big nose in that example. As I said, the painting, I think was the previous example, was very striking. So the painting impacted me. It hit me. So here we have the subject he, we had the auxiliary had, which is used in the perfect. Remember the present perfect and the past perfect. You need the auxiliary have, and in this case it's the past in the auxiliary and the participle. So this is a perfect example of the past perfect. Typically we use the past perfect before another action in the past simple. So he hadn't struck gold yet, and the work was becoming. So these two actions in the past, was becoming. Quit is the past irregular. Quit, 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 it's irregular. So this is the past, this is the past perfect. So there's 2 or 3 actions in the past, and for this reason, for this motive, we use the past perfect. So he hadn't struck gold yet is typical in the negative, and it's todavía. So he hadn't struck gold, not yet, until now, no. And the work subject was becoming. That is the past continuous. Remember the present continuous, I am eating. Past continuous, I was eating. Future continuous, I will be eating. And in this situation, the work was becoming, in the past continuous, tiresome. So tiresome is excellent vocabulary, and it's more advanced. It's related to tired. So the person is very, very tired. Also, the work is very tiring, so you need to be clear with the difference with the ed and the ing. For example, excited, exciting, bored, boring, etc. So there's a big difference, and every day I try to explain and try to show this importance. So for example, your sensation, your feeling, you are bored, I am bored, but the movie is boring. So it depends if it's your sensation or if it's away from you. So I am bored, but the movie is boring. I am excited. It's my sensation, it's my feeling, but the movie is exciting. Okay, so it's similar with tired. The person is tired. I am tired, but the work is tiring. That means that the work is difficult, the work makes you tired, and a synonym for tiring is tiresome. A little bit more advanced, a little bit less common, but the significance here is tiring. So very difficult, it makes you tired. Okay, subject he, remember I, you, he, she, we. We always need the subject in English, always. I think in Spanish you can eliminate, you can forget the subject, but in English you need the subject almost always. Here it's the verb sell. It's irregular in the past, so the verb to sell, past is sold. Okay, and we have a lot of possible combinations with this verb to sell. For example, a substantivo is a sale. You can say a person is a seller. Very important phrasal verb possibilities as well. On sale, the significance is available. Sold out, the significance is no more available. So very important possibilities, and it's also possible for sale, which is maybe for property. They're the typical context. So the house is for sale, the house is available to buy, the tickets are on sale, the tickets are available to buy. And sold out, the significance is you have no more possibility to buy the tickets because they are all sold, they are all gone. Okay, so very important. Family, the verb to sell, sold is the past, substantivo is a sale. So the person, he, sold his. This is the possessive adjective. For example, my book, your book, his book, her book. So in this situation, it's the possessive adjective. Equipment is the things or the material that he uses. To, so typically with the verb to sell, it's very, very common with the preposition to. I sell my bicycle to you. So it's very typical with the preposition to. Another man. This is very important. The difference between another and other. Okay, most people might be familiar with the difference. So basically, we use another before the substantivo in the singular. For example, another day, another week, another year, singular, singular, singular. But for other, it's before the substantivo in the plural. Other days, other weeks, other years, etc. Okay, when you have an option or a choice between two things, you can say, do you want this coffee or do you want the other coffee? So when you have a choice, you can say, I want the other coffee. Okay, that's possible. And finally, we can say the others, which has the significance, the group of people. So you travel to Italy with us, or you travel to Italy with the others, los otros in Espanol, I think. So very important to pay attention always to this word and to these connections. Okay, so in this situation, another man, because it's singular. And remember, one man is singular, but two or three men is plural. The same with woman, one woman and maybe three women. So you need to be very, very careful. We say one person and three people. Very simple, very important, and very obvious when people make the mistake and make the error. Okay, so in this situation, he sold his equipment to another man who, so this is the relative pronoun again. Like this, it's the substitution for the man, and in this situation, it's the same. It's a substitution for the man because we begin, we start a new structure, a new sentence, a new clause, and for this reason, we need a subject, and it's the relative pronoun. Okay, so who resumed, the verb is to resume, which is like to begin again, and it's the past simple. Resumed mining, he continued mining. Where, that's the location. It is the subject, and that means the work. So here's the substitution, the construction, the work, the effort had been left off. Very difficult, very fluent, very native. Okay, and it's a phrasal verb. The typical structure is to begin where we left off. That's very difficult when you learn English, but basically that means to begin where you stopped, okay, where you last stopped. Very important concept and very many examples you can create. So if you stop your work here and then you take a break, you go home, and then the next day you return, you continue where the location you stopped, where you left off. Difficult, that's a good example of phrasal verbs, and it's difficult, but that is good example of very difficult English. So to resume, to continue mining where the work had been, which is the past perfect, with left. So it's difficult structure also for the verb had been left off. Okay, here we have the article. So the article is necessary for the substantivo. The minor is the substantivo. The is the article. New is the adjective. So the new minor is the subject. Was advised by. Very, very interesting. So the verb is to advise. Important because you have the S with the verb. I advise you, you advise me, he advises me with the third person with the S. Como dar consejo. But you need to be careful because the substantivo is advice with the C. Okay, so that is important. It's the noun, it's the substantivo. So it's very typical in English to give advice. In English, we never say an advice, never. That's the problem. Okay, so that's the error. We never say an advice. We always say some advice. Okay, or you can say a bit of advice, or you can say a piece of advice. That is the most important lesson in relation to the verb to advise with the S, the verb to get or to receive some advice with the substantivo, and some advice, a bit of advice, a piece of advice are the most typical quantifiers, or that is the way we say this structure. It's the same with news. We say maybe some news, a piece of news, a bit of news, and that is very, very important as well, because a lot of people regularly have this difficulty. But here it's the verb to advise. So we have the new minor, that's the subject, and his engineer. So we have two people, but we have the auxiliary verb to be plus the participle. So this is an indication of the passivo in English. And in English we say the active and the passive. So I'll give you a little example. I drank the water. So it's the past. That is the active because we have the subject, the original verb in the past simple, and the object. So this is considered the active. To create the passive, we change the position of the subject and the object. So the object becomes the beginning. We need an extra, introduce, extra auxiliary verb to be, plus the participle, the third column of the original verb drink, and we normally have by, but it's not always necessary. You can eliminate, you can remove the person. So the passive here would be the water. This is the past simple, so the verb to be is necessary in the past simple, was. The participle of the verb drink is drunk, so drink, drank, drunk, difficult verb, was drunk by the object, which is I, but when we change it to the object position, we say by me. Difficult example, very, very typical, very fluent, very, very good, and this is just a simple example. So the water was drunk by me is the passivo example of this structure, and here in the sentence this is the passivo because really the engineer advised the new minor. So that's the active. The engineer advised the new minor is the active, and then the passivo is the new minor was advised by the engineer. So there's a very, very good, solid example of the passive structure that's very, very important. That, there was, so in the structure there is, it's como hay in Espanol. Hay mucho chocolate en mi armario. So there's a lot of chocolate, so it's possible singular. There is or there was in the past. Gold, only, just, only 3 feet away preposition. So the distance is 3 feet away from, that's the typical preposition, away from me, or away, so this is very good. Away from where? That's interesting. So we have adjective, so we have preposition, and a relative pronoun. Away from where? The first minor, subject, stopped, past simple, and after the verb stop, we normally need the gerundio. Stop eating, stop talking, stop running, stop drinking, stop watching. So stopped is typical the gerundio, and the verb to dig is very, very important, is excavar. So to dig, and we have a few expressions to dig a hole, which is typical in conversation. So if in a conversation you say something silly, like you put your foot in your mouth, you say something silly, and you continue to make the situation worse and worse, you dig a hole for yourself in a conversation. So to dig a hole, hueco, in Espanol, you make the situation worse, worse, worse. You dig a hole, okay? To dig in is flexible, and that could mean to be very stubborn, okay? So if you have your attitude, you have your opinion, and you decide to dig in, you decide to stay in the one location, this is your position, you dig into this position, you're not moving, that means you're very stubborn. Like cabeza muy fuerte en español, cabezón, no sé es posible para decir cabezón, creo que es posible, but it means you have a very strong opinion, strong attitude, and you dig in. Also, a little informal, to dig in means to start eating. Okay, so if I say to you, enjoy your food, thank you for your food, enjoy your food, start eating, dig in. Okay, it's possible to say to tuck in, you can say to dive in. They're possible structures to say informally to start eating. Okay, so to dig in, to tuck in, or to dive in. Okay, also with dig, we have a phrasal verb to dig out. So imagine your friend is in a difficult situation. Your friend is in a hole and your friend needs your help to rescue the person. So you need to dig your friend out, literally, because they are in a hole, but it's also a metaphor for a bad situation. You help your situation, your friend. So you want to give your friend a dig out. Okay, so to give your friend a dig out, and it's a substantivo here. So the significance is to give your friend help, to give your friend support, and it's very famous, very common, very fluent, possibly a little informal, but very, very typical. Okay, so to give your friend a dig out, the significance is to give your friend some help and some support. Okay, lots of possibilities to dig someone. So this possibly is informal as well. It's like to punch. So in boxing, you have to punch, or it's possible to dig. Okay, so to dig someone is probably informal, and maybe it means to punch. Also, you are staying, like living, in digs, and this is a typical word for when you live in accommodation, typically a house with a family, and they welcome you, they allow you to stay with the family, like a bed and breakfast, but maybe it's for business, maybe it's organized by your company, and they allow you to stay with a family. So the digs are the location that you stay with the family, like a host family, okay? Host family, host house. So they are very, very typical as well. Also, finally, we say to have a dig at someone. That is very similar to punch. So if you want to criticize somebody, if you want to complain and you want to criticize somebody, it's very typical to have a dig at somebody. You want to complain, you want to criticize somebody, so to have a dig at that. Okay, so it's one word, excavar in Espanol, but it is very common and very flexible in English. Okay, so the engineer was, that's the verb to be in the past, was right. Remember, the significance right is derecha, but también is correcto. So you are right, you are correct. So right has the same significance as correct, but also it means the direction, izquierda, left and right. And also we have the human rights, or it's your right to do something. Okay, so that means it's your You are entitled, which is very important in English and a bit difficult when you learn English. You are entitled to apply for this course, and that means you have the right, you have the permission, you are permitted, you are allowed to apply for this course. You have the right. Okay, so it's a very interesting word. So the engineer was correct in this way, which means, so this is probably the relative pronoun, again similar to who, except which, and the verb is to mean, which is like significar. So it is flexible because the verb to mean is to signify, but also it's an adjective, a mean person. Okay, and that means maybe tacaño in Espanol. So in relation to money, if the person is very mean in relation to money, the significance is the person does not pay, is not very generous. The person is very, very mean. But also just in bad behavior, if it's a bad action, the person is very mean as well. Okay, so it is a good word, and there's two typical possibilities. The first one is como o sea, I mean, in Espanol, signify, or very bad behavior, very bad attitude. Okay, so here's the verb, the first minor, a new subject. The verb to be in the past was a, article, indefinite. Mere is adjective, very, very important adjective. 3 feet away, that's the substantivo. From, away from, that's a typical combination. And I think we had it here already, away from. Striking gold is like encontrar, finding gold, before he quit. So preposition, subject, verb, quit, and it's the irregular verb in the past. Quit in the present, rendirse, quit in the past, quit, quit, quit. That's the third column as well. Mere is very difficult but very important. For example, I have a mere €5, and basically it just means only or minimum. I have a very small quantity, and you can say I was merely looking at the book. So when somebody makes an accusation and you say, no, I was only looking at the book, so there was no other intention, I was merely only looking at the book. So very, very important word, very important and very frequent and very fluent. Okay, so that's the story. Basically, the man was working for a long time. He was trying to search for gold. He was looking for the money. He was looking for the gold, which is very valuable, but he decided to stop working. So he quit the job because it was too difficult. And a new person continued in the same position. And after 3 days or 3 meters, he found the gold. So I suppose the story is never to stop, never to quit, never to give up. And that's probably the moral here, the explanation. So here's the first explanation. When, this is the time, cuando, things, cosas, asuntos, problemas, things start. So that's the subject. The verb is to start. There's another verb, to get. So again, the verb is to get, which is very, very flexible. The significance is maybe to obtain, to arrive, to reach, okay, to become. They're the most typical verbs associated with the verb to get. And in this situation, it's probably become. So when things start or begin to become difficult, to get hard, to become really, really complicated. New verb, try, intentar. Another verb, infinitivo, to persevere. Persevere is very similar in Spanish. I think it means to continue. Try to continue, try to be persistent, continue. So try to persevere through, a través, the adversity. So the adversity is the difficulty, the problems, the bad situation. So you need to persevere. You need to continue a través the adversity. Many people give up. So many people quit. Many people stop. On is a bit difficult to explain, but you give up following their dreams. It's possible, this sentence, without on. You can remove on here, no problem. But the significance is people quit, people give up, people leave following their dreams, because this is a linker. The work is the subject. Becomes is a synonym for gets. Llevar a ser. So the work gets. To is demasiado. Very important in the adjective. Before an adjective, it's demasiado. Too hungry, too happy, it's a little negative, it's excessive. So too difficult is like demasiado difícil. Tedious is very, very good vocabulary. Significant is difficult, complicated, hard, and again, tiresome, which is the word we had here, which is also a synonym for tiring, okay, because you're very tired after the work. So when the work becomes very, very difficult, very hard, very tough, tiresome, tedious, arduous, but often, not always, only often, and the pronunciation of the T is silent, so phonetically, the correct way to pronounce this word is often. T is silent, so not often, just often, okay? So often, you are, subject, the verb to be, adjective in the comparative, so close, closer, closest. You are closer, preposition to the finish line. Very, very good vocabulary. The finish line is the end of the race. Than, because it's the comparative, closer than. You may, subject. Modal verb is like possibility. You may, you might, you could. Remember, they are almost the same. May, might, could, they are almost the same, and it's for possibility. So you are closer than you possibly might or could think. Okay, so very, very good small grammar lessons, small grammar points, very interesting. And linker, if is typical for the conditional. Subject, you. Verb is push. This action, when you push, pull is the opposite. Just, only, merely, a little harder. So here it's the article. A little is the substantivo. Harder is the comparative. Hard, harder. You will succeed. Future, simple, because the verb is to succeed, and the significance is tener éxito, because the adjective is successful and success is substantivo. Very important family, okay, because a verb is to succeed. It's very typical with the preposition plus ing. For example, I succeeded in contacting my friend. I succeeded in winning the match. That's the typical structure with succeed, como tener éxito. Éxito is success, substantivo, and successful is the adjective. Okay, so very important family, very fluent, very typical, very, very common as well. Okay, so that's the story. Interesting, and I suppose it's easy to say. Maybe it's easier said than done. That's the expression. Easier said than done, but it is just a little story and a small short story for inspiration, I think. So hopefully you remember that story when you want to quit your English exercises and you want to stop, or you want to quit something or anything. Continue. Well, I suppose that's the advice, but obviously people interpret this whatever way you want. So let me just check now with the Facebook to make sure that we are still connected, and I think hopefully we are still functioning and still working. I think yes, so you are welcome to leave a comment, leave a message, etc., and hopefully it's working and it will continue to work. So the next story, we'll continue to the next story, and the story is the rocks, the pebbles, and the sand. So very, very interesting vocabulary. The first vocabulary is a pebble. So you can see in the picture here, we have the sand, which is arena in Espanol. You have the rock, which is piedra, and you have the pebble. So the pebble is the little stone, pequeño, piedra pequeño, or pequeña, and not Pedro, not pequeño, Pedro, it's piedra pequeña, no sé. So the stone, the little pebble, is the small flat stone that you throw, tirar or lanzar in the agua, in the lago. So a pebble is very specific vocabulary. Also, we say pebble dash, which is a very specific type of concrete. When you construct the house, you have the wall, you build a wall, and you put the special pebble dash on the wall, and the significance is a type of stone that has the texture that is very maybe rough texture and very maybe lumpy, but that is pebble dash. Okay, so it's a verb and it's a substantivo. So this is the story, and let's read the story a little. Okay, so a philosophy So here it's the substantivo because it's the subject you study in school. You study philosophy. The person is the philosopher. Okay, so philosophy is the substantivo. It's this asignatura in school. Professor, okay, sorry, here it's the adjective, and professor is the substantivo. Remember, the or is the suffix, and typically or and er sound like a donkey. The or and the er are typical suffixes for a person. Okay, for example, doctor, director, painter. So here it's a professor, and it's obviously a person. Once is una vez. Stood is the verb. So this is probably the adverb, I think. It's related to the time, once. But stood is very, very interesting because the verb is to stand. And obviously at the moment I am sitting, but if I want to stand, I move my body and I stand. But the past is stood, so it's irregular, and unfortunately we have a lot of irregular verbs in English. For example, understand and understood. That is maybe the best way to remember it. So past is stood, the preposition is stood up. Before his class, the significance is maybe in front of. So he stood up before. It's not related to time, it's related to position. So this is the position of the class, and he stands up before the class. Okay, so normally before is related to time, but in this situation it's related to position. Again, class is substantivo. Possessive adjective is his, my class, your class, his class, masculine, her class, feminine. So of course you need to be very clear with the masculine and the feminine difference here. With is maybe the linker. A large, this is the article. So when we have the article, we need the substantivo. Jar is the connection. So a jar, and a jar I think is una jarra. And it is possible in English that you have a jar which is informal, and the significance is a beer. Okay, so do you want a jar? That means, do you want a beer? Do you want a pint glass, for example? And I think in Spanish it's the same. Una jarra is a jar of beer. And it is possible as well, the person is, he or she is jarred, maybe informal, and the significance is borracha. Creo que es borracha, like drunk. Okay, it is possible as well to jar your knee. For example, to jar your knee is when you maybe lock your knee, this action to lock. So to jar your knee is when you do this action, a bit specific. But yes, the person is jarred is probably a little bit informal, and the significance is drunk. Okay, so that's the substantivo. A jar, article is a. So we have adjectives. We have three adjectives: large, empty, mayonnaise maybe is the substantivo, but large is grande, empty is vacío. Mayonnaise is very similar in other languages. The next sentence, he. Fill is the verb, como llenar. The past simple, irregular is ed, so he filled. Llenar in the pasado. The jar, preposition to, he filled to. The top is the location. Okay, the maximum, the limit, he filled the jar to the top. With, again, is the linker. Large, adjective. Rocks is the substantivo. Piedras, okay, grandes. So piedras grandes with large rocks, he filled, llenar. Fill is maybe adjective, you can say full. So for example, I am full, and the significance is with food. I am not hungry anymore because I am full. Okay. Fill, yeah, we have a new possibility as well. Get your fill of Netflix, maybe. Get your fill of football. So it's like your quota. If you get or obtain, remember get has a lot of possibilities, but if you get or obtain your fill, substantivo, of Netflix, or your fill of football, it's like your capacity, your quota. Okay, so every day you maybe want to watch 30 minutes of your series. This is your fill and no more. Okay, so to get your fill of your series, to get your fill of football is to get your quota. It's also possible as well to get your fix, which is maybe a little informal because normally the verb to fix is arreglar in Espanol, but a fix is like a solution, which is maybe the connection. So if you are a chocoholic or if you're a coffee addict, you love coffee and you need coffee every morning. Every morning you need to get your fix. So you need to get your quota, you need to get your fill of coffee, you need to get your regular portion of coffee, because it arreglar, it fixes your condition, so you feel better after. So it is very typical to get your fix, which is the significance to get your quota to feel good with the quantity that you have. Okay, so in this situation he filled the jar, and so here it's the linker, and the verb is to ask, regular in the past, asked. His, again, adjective possessive, my students, your students, his students for masculine possession, her students for feminine possessions. So he has the students if the jar was, so subject, verb to be, adjective, and there's the adjective full. So very, very interesting detail, very important. The next one, again, possessive adjective, my students, your students, masculine, his students in the plural, all. So that is maybe the adjective or the adverb, but the verb is to agree, and it's the past agreed. This is very, very important because in Spanish it's estoy de acuerdo, but in English it's just I agree. And the typical error, the typical mistake is to use the verb to be in English. No, we never really use the verb to be with the verb to agree. So I agree significa estoy de acuerdo. So you need to be very careful, because always in English, I agree, you agree, never I am, not really I am agreed. No, we say I agree, and the negative is I disagree. Very, very important, because a lot of people make that confusion regularly. Very, very regularly people make this error all the time, and it's very obvious. Okay, so just a little tip. Okay, so the students agreed the jar was full. The jar was full. Subject, the verb to be in the past plus the adjective. He is the subject. Then is probably the adverb again, I think. So entonces, the verb add is añadir, and it's regular in the past. So he added small pebbles, and you remember the pebble is the small stone that you throw. So he added small pebbles. Add has the typical preposition to. So to add to is the typical preposition, and very, very important. Okay, so to add to something, to add to somebody. And linker, gave. So the verb to give, it's irregular in the past. Again, another irregular verb. Give, gave, given, participle. So he gave the jar, the object. A bit is like a little. So remember, a bit happy, a bit hungry is like a little. Okay, a little hungry, a little happy. You can say a bit of chocolate. You can say a bit of food, which is like a little piece of food. So he gave the jar a little shake. Remember, milk shake, dar el mano. Shake is this action, to shake. If I am shaking, I may be very nervous, I may be very frightened, I may be very cold if I am shaking. Okay, that's a possible structure. I am shaking, which maybe means nervous, which maybe means frightened, which maybe means cold as well. And it is a possible structure. I am shaking in my boots is when you're maybe sarcastic or maybe serious and you're scared. Okay, so to be shaking in your boots is very, very famous. But in this situation, it's just a physical shake of the jar. So is like consequences for the reason, for the motive. So the pebbles is the subject, could is the modal verb. Remember, may, might, could have the same significance, and here it's the modal verb with the possibility. But after the modal verb, the next verb is normally removing the infinitive. For example, could go, may watch, might eat. So that's the typical structure. After the modal verb, we have another verb, but we eliminate two always. Could go, may go, might go, and it's the same significance. But the verb here is to disperse, which is like to separate. So if you disperse the group, you separate the group, or you divide the group as well. Themselves, so this is reflexive. Myself, yourself, himself, herself, ourselves, yourselves, themselves. Difficult, especially the spelling. Preposition among is like with, so this is very, very good. Among friends basically means with. maybe between, so it's something similar to this, but also we can say amongst, which is maybe a little more formal. So amongst friends, both are very typical, both are common, but you just need to be careful and be aware of the possibilities. And it means in the middle of or with friends. It's very similar to amid or amidst, and that means that you are in the middle, because you can see the word mid is related to middle, but it's a preposition, I think. So you are amid exams, we are amidst the summer, and the significance is in the middle of the summer. Again, then is like entonces, so subject he, verb is to ask, regular in the past, he asked again, de nuevo, he asked for another time, is the jar full now? So when it's a question, we change the position. So the jar is full is the affirmative, but the question is the jar full now, okay? The students agreed that the jar was still full. So the students agreed the jar was full, but the students agreed that the jar was still, aún or todavía in Espanol, okay? The professor, again, then, next, so, very, very common, poured. Remember the verb to pour, I think last week we explained, the verb to pour is related to water. For example, I have my bottle of water and I pour the water into the glass. And in Spanish, just to double check the significance of pour, so you are sure it's here. Here is the translator. And the verb to pour is servir, verter. Okay, so servir. But in English, we have the verb to serve, which is obviously similar. But in English, you can say servir tu corazón. No sé en español es posible, but we say to pour your heart out, and it's like confesar. So if you confess, you pour your heart out, and we say to pour your heart into your work, and the significance is para dar un 100%. So to give 100% is to pour your heart into your work. Okay, so very, very good vocabulary. Not put, lo siento, no es poner, es más servir. Okay, sand, arena, into the jar to fill up all the remaining, so article, okay, article is a definite article for the substantivo space. Remaining is adjective, empty is adjective, so the remaining is a bit difficult. So I will remain here, and this is the significance that I will stay, I will continue to stay in this position, I will remain here. And then you can say the remainder of the movie, which is like the rest of the movie, and you can also say the remaining part of the movie. So it's very, very interesting, very, very important, and the remainder is like the rest, okay, the rest of the day. Okay, so here it's the remaining empty space. The students then agreed again that the jar was full. So that's the story. I need to read it again just a little bit quickly. So a philosophy professor once stood up before his class with a large empty mayonnaise jar. He filled the jar to the top with large rocks and asked the students if the jar was full. Of course it's full, I think. The students all agreed the jar was full. He then added small pebbles to the jar and gave the jar a bit of a shake so the pebbles could disperse or move among the larger rocks, so there's more stones in the jar. Then he asked, is the jar full now? The student said yes, the jar was still full. The professor then poured sand into the jar and then filled up the remaining empty space, so there's more content now in the jar, and asked the students, was the jar full? So the student said yes, the jar was still full. So what's the metaphor or the moral? I suppose, in my opinion, it is that you can do more than you think. So when you say you are satisfied, when you say you have done enough, when you say you are happy with your work, maybe there's always room for more, there's always room for improvement. That's my interpretation of that, and probably you feel possibly similar. But the explanation here in the story, the jar represents your life, and the rocks and pebbles and sand are things that fill up your life. The rocks represent the most important projects and the things you have going on or occurring or happening. For example, such as spending time with your family, maintaining proper health, and the difference between health and healthy is very, very important. This means that if the pebbles and the sand were lost, the jar would still be full and your life would still have meaning. Interesting. So the pebbles represent the things in your life that matter, that are important, but that you could live without. The pebbles are certainly things that give your life meaning, such as your job, your house, your hobbies, activities, and friendships, but they are not critical for you to have a meaningful life. These things often come and go and are not permanent or essential to your overall, in total, sobre todo, well-being, bien, estado bien. Finally, the sand represents the remaining filler things in your life and material possessions. This could be small things such as watching television. Browsing is very difficult vocabulary. It's like buscando. For example, you go to the shop and you're browsing. It's just looking through your favorite social media site, or running errands. This means to do jobs, little messages, to do a few messages, to do a few errands, which is the significance to do a few little jobs, like go to the shop, collect some things, go to the bank, etc. These things don't mean much to your life as a whole in total, and are likely, probably, they are probable or likely, because likely is probable. And also we have the likelihood, which is very, very important vocabulary, and that means the probability. Okay, so the likelihood is the probability, and very important word, the likelihood. So are likely only done to waste time or to get, to achieve small tasks accomplished. Accomplished is like conseguir. Okay, and remember, to get, we had the verb here, to get. Another significance is to achieve. Okay, so we had a lot of possibilities with the verb to get. I just want to add another one, is probably to achieve. And if you want the notes from the class, I can put the notes on the bottom of the Facebook page. If you want, just let me know. So that's the story. That's the explanation of the story. And finally, the moral of the story is that basically, here you can see the moral is, the metaphor here is verb, that if you start with putting sand into the jar, you will not have room for rocks or pebbles. Okay, interesting. So they say that the stones are the most important parts of your jar or of your life. Okay, so this holds true. That's a good expression. We have another possibility. This rings true. So this holds true. So this means it continues to be true. You can also say this rings true with the things you let or permit into your life. If you spend all of your time on small, insignificant things, you will run out of, very, very important phrasal verb, to run out of time, to run out of energy, to run out of food, to run out of patience. The significance is to have no more. You have no more. You have lost all the time, energy, food, and patience. So to run out of is very, very important. And the significance is to lose all your time, to lose your money, etc. So you've run out of space, you've run out of room for the things that are actually, which is the hecho. So you need to be careful. Actually, in English, is the hecho, because currently in English is at the moment. So there's a very, very important difference between the two. Currently, at the moment, important. In order to, very important structure. I go to the shop in order to buy my chocolate. I go to the cinema in order to watch the new movie. So in order to is very important and very good structure. In order to have a more effective and efficient life, pay attention to the rocks, because they are critical to your long-term well-being. So this is an English class, but it's also some interesting advice as well there. So pay attention to the rocks in the story. That's the advice. Okay, so two very interesting stories, and I think it's good and it's better compared to maybe a news article. It's a bit more useful and a bit more interesting, but the vocabulary is still excellent. The vocabulary and the grammar and the lessons here are very, very important. So I'm happy, very happy to give this free class. It's a very, very good opportunity with the technology, with the pandemic, with people working at home, with people needing to learn English. hopefully this class can definitely help a little, I hope. Of course, there's a lot of content. Of course, there's a lot of things to remember, but every day you can see the same things again and again. Of course, speaking practice is important. You need to practice your speaking. You need to practice your writing. And there's a lot of aspects to learning and improving English, and like other things. And hopefully this class can help a little. So thank you for connecting. Thank you for watching. Please leave a message or a comment if you have any questions, if you have any comments, for any feedback. Hopefully the connection was fine. Hopefully you can understand the class and you can follow everything with the connection. Hopefully, today at 3:15 we have a business English webinar. I think there's very few people, so there's very little people at the moment. So it's a possibility I will return today online for the free class on Facebook Live at maybe 3:15. That's my alternative. I will possibly give the class, the webinar, online direct at 3:15. So to do some exercises from the advanced exams possibly today at 3:15 on Facebook Live. That's my idea at the moment, unless we have a private class, but I don't think that's looking that way. Good. So remember, everything is free. This is a free class, and I want to show you, if people want to leave a little tip or a little support, you are very, very welcome to leave a little donation or a little support. And here you can see the information. I think it's coming now for the small contribution if you want. It's not necessary, but it's an option if you want. There's three possibilities. The first possibility is maybe with Bizum, the application. If you want to leave a small donation, that would be great. Revolut is the second possibility with the mobile phone number. That's an option. The third possibility is directly with a bank transfer, and that's another possibility as well. Just as I said, a small donation would be amazing, but it's not my objective. My objective is to give the class for free, and also the objective is to give the other classes in the mornings and the webinars in the afternoon for small fees as well. So that should be good. But if you want to make a small donation, you're very welcome, and it would be very appreciated, of course. So that's the class. I hope you enjoyed a lot, and again, thank you so much for connecting. And please leave a comment, please leave feedback, because it's better that I know if you understood things or if you need me to change or to improve a few things. Okay, thank you so much, and I'm just going to try and finish the class now on Facebook, and sometimes it takes a couple of minutes, but again, thank you so much, and hopefully you have a very, very good day, and talk to you soon. Thank you, and take care.